Today's book review is about Julie Cantrell's The Feathered Bone. And if you can't tell, this is the wrong hand. It's a library book. Front and center, this book was amazing. But I've had it for like a month and a half. Because as you all know, it takes me forever to actually read books. So I just kept renewing it because I didn't have time to read it. But once I did read it, 2 days, guys. And that's only because I had to go to sleep. I would have read it in one sitting if I could. It was such an amazing book. It was one of those books that caught me by surprise because, again, I have no clue how I discovered it, but it's about a kidnapped girl. And we all know that I have this thing for the macabre, so I was like, I'm gonna pick that up, and it blew me away. Back to the library book thing. I am on my final renewal, and I was like, I gotta read this book before I have to return it, because my library is 45 minutes away, just for various reasons, and so I'm like, why would I check out a book and then have to, drive the 45 minutes to pick it up, never read it, and then drive the 45 minutes to drop it off. So that's like an hour and a half's trip just for a book I never read. So I made a point of reading this book, and I don't regret it. I don't regret the 3 hours it took to check this book out. But I need to find a new home library. But the library system I'm a part of is so amazing, it's hard to let it go. Anyways, let's talk about The Feathered Bone. As I said, it is about a girl who is kidnapped. And I mean, there are just so many aspects of this book that made it amazing. Like, it brought me close to tears. I think the only reason I didn't cry was because I was like, Beth, be a big girl. You know, like, don't weep. But it's also set during the time of Katrina. So not only do we have a kidnapped girl who is sold into prostitution, but we have the events of Katrina. We have the narrator, her daughter commits suicide, her husband leaves her. There are just so many aspects of this book that, like, it's heartbreak after heartbreak. But one thing I hadn't expected was the Christian or the religious undertone. And some of you right now may be like, all right, never gonna read that book. But it is one where it's completely understandable, because there are just times when people have to turn to God. And the main character, or not the main character, the protagonist, I would say that the main character is Sarah. Sarah is the kidnapped girl, but our narrator is a woman named Amanda. Because obviously the whole book is about finding Sarah, or figuring out what happened to Sarah, and it just happens to be narrated by Amanda. And so, anyways, we're going to get away from that because I tend to stray. I'm going to try not to stray today. So, so Amanda, you know, she grew up in a religious household, but, you know, at some point in her life, like, even though she still went to church, religion wasn't necessarily the center of her life. And then, obviously, all these things start happening to her, and she loses it completely, only to rediscover it again. Although, you know, she still has questions. But mirroring this, we get little snippets of Sarah, so like little journal entries. And it's essentially her faith that gets her through her sorry, I completely lost my word. Her abduction. So I thought that was particularly poignant because it wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't like, I'm a Christian writer. I don't even know if Julie Cantrell is religious, but it's not like, I need to preach at you and I need to shove all these Bible verses at you. But it does show you how people can get through hard circumstances via their faith. Let's get some details of the plot out of the way. Amanda has a daughter, Ellie, who is 12. Ellie's best friend is Sarah, who is also 12. They're born on the same day. They're like sisters. And Sarah's mother is Beth, and she is one of Amanda's best friends from childhood. The girls and their mothers are on a school field trip to New Orleans. They live in Louisiana, and this is pre-Katrina. So I love how obviously we know Katrina's gonna happen, and so just like little comments and little foreshadowing are kind of placed here and there and everywhere. They're visiting the French Quarter, and Sarah goes missing. Nobody can figure out what happened to her. Beth had some other obligations, and so she had left. And so Amanda had basically been in charge of both girls. And so now that Sarah is gone, Amanda feels responsible for the disappearance. At some point, Beth is like, look, we don't blame you, but we do blame you, but we don't blame you. But still, Amanda carries this guilt with her all the way to the end. And then her daughter Ellie also carries this guilt, which I know I already spoiled that for you, and I forgot to tell you. It was just a slip of the tongue, but obviously Ellie's guilt leads her into just a very deep depression from which she never recovers because she does kill herself. And so it's just really interesting to see how all of these people carry the weight of something that was not their fault. So Amanda, it wasn't her fault that Sarah got abducted, because the girls have been like, Mom, go away, you know, we're just gonna go use the bathroom, we're standing in line, like, you can go help our teacher. The teacher, she feels guilty because she brought the kids to New Orleans. The bus driver feels guilty because it was his obligation to bring everybody to New Orleans and then to return them safely home. Beth feels guilty. Beth feels guilty because she should have stayed with her daughter. There are so many levels and variations of guilt, and I think that it just goes along with the layers that this book contains. Honestly, the only person who is guilty of the abduction is the abductor. I mean, in my opinion, Sarah shares some of the guilt because she agreed to go. Because, spoiler alert, what happens is there is this prostitution ring, and the leader of this ring, he sees Sarah, he enlists one of his girls to go get her. This girl tricks her, but Sarah believes what this stranger tells her to do, and that is how she's abducted. So in my opinion, yes, Sarah's only 12, but she knew better. All these people carry guilt when they couldn't see the future. One thing I really loved, right, is how Amanda, in a way, got away scot-free. She is not the one who lost a daughter. She's the one who gets to bring her kid home. So yes, while both of them have this guilt associated with the abduction, they were the fortunate ones. Yet, in the end, Amanda is the one who lost everything. Things turn out for her in the end, but in the process, it's like a 4 or 5 year period. In this 4 or 5 year period, she loses everything. She loses her husband, she loses her daughter, she loses her faith, she loses her sense of self, she loses her job, she loses her home. It reminded me of Just Like Fate, in which same girl, different decisions. You think one decision is the right decision, ergo, everything following that decision will lead her down the favorable path, when, in my opinion, it was the wrong decision that led her to a better place. So it's just really interesting how we thought that Amanda, who was not the one to lose a child right away, who should be grateful for it, who should go on to live a happily ever after, is the one who ends up, I mean, in the end, she kind of has a happily ever after, but she has so much tragedy in her past that on some level, it's really not a happily ever after. Like, a happily ever after would have been, okay, get rid of the douchebag husband, but keep her daughter. That's just not how it happened. She kind of had to start her life over. But I digress. Sarah disappears, and there's this huge rush, as you can expect, to find her. Nobody does. And Ellie just starts to spiral. She is a character which, having experienced depression myself, I thought it was really well done, really realistically portrayed. But I it did bother me a little bit. Maybe not because of how it was portrayed, but because of how Amanda handled it. Because Amanda's a social worker, which is ironic, right? Or not really so, because obviously the author knew all of this going in. But her job is handling people going through crises, yet she saw nothing in her own life. I mean, she saw the obvious things, but she didn't see the important things. And then even the important things that she did see, she either didn't do anything about, or she couldn't do anything about it. And so yes, she noticed that things were wrong with Ellie, but it wasn't until 2 years later where Ellie ends up killing herself. And so my question was, how could she not have seen this? Or even, why didn't Ellie give any of the typical clues that are associated with suicide? Giving things away, leaving a note, acting differently. You know, it wasn't, I mean, yeah, like, she had just started school and she and her mother had had this really fun shopping trip. But I wondered, you know, is that how it is sometimes, where there are no warning signs? Like, yes, there was the obvious warning sign. She had withdrawn. She had expressed moments of, like, why me? I can't go on. Sarah's never coming back. It's my fault. Nothing will ever be the same. Even if she does come back, we have lost her. So yes, she does give major warning signs, but right until that very end, right at the very end, there's really nothing. Which I guess, you know, is great for the book because it's a surprise, like it catches us off guard. But we all know how much I love for things to be realistic. And so it's just kind of sat with me in a bothersome sort of way as to, like, is that what some people do? They suffer long enough and then they just take their lives without doing any of those preemptive measures. I'm not trying to lessen the severity of that, but I did wonder, I was like, is that really how it would have gone? Anyways, yes, so Ellie is depressed. Beth and her husband, Preacher, because he's the youth minister at their church, having a really hard time. Beth is obsessive, which she should be. She's the mother. And so what happens is they essentially lose their faith as well. And I thought that was really interesting. Like, I'm probably going to say that a lot. There's just a lot of points in this novel that I just thought were really thought-provoking because, like Amanda, whose job is to counsel others, Beth and Preacher have spent maybe the entirety of their adult lives witnessing to others, coaching others through difficult times, being there for those in need, and kind of providing that shoulder, you know, providing faith, providing words of wisdom and encouragement. Yet, when it comes to them, they are like, you know, at a certain point, they're like, we just don't know if we have any hope. We don't know if we have any faith left, which it's natural. You gotta say, why us? Like, God, why us? If everything happens for a reason, what is the reason for this, you know? So I just thought it was really interesting how we have this strong Christian couple, and then he's like, I can't do my job anymore. I don't want to be in the ministry. I'm going to go work for a pool company. I will say Beth's obsession got a little irritating. Like, it was just a little heavy-handed. But that's minor. That's incredibly minor. So then, you know, Hurricane Katrina hits. And it's about a year later. And she is just like, this is it, Amanda. We're gonna find Sarah because she's gonna be in a shelter. She's gonna be in some place of some sort. Somebody's gonna see her. We're gonna find her. And they don't, obviously. And what happens is, as I said, we get little journal entries from Sarah. So she had been in one place, and I guess it was too close to the hot zone. I don't know much about Louisiana. I don't even know if these are real cities, but I guess, you know, then they incidentally moved like 30 minutes from her hometown, which that's just another point for me. I was like, wow, 30 minutes. She was 30 minutes away from her home, and nobody knew how close she was. They had gone to this town looking for her, handing out flowers, knocking on doors, nothing, you know, so it's just like so close, yet so far. And that is just one more thing that makes this book so amazing. But anyways, yes, so she was safe. They obviously did not find her after Hurricane Katrina. But I loved the Hurricane Katrina thing because I was 19 or so. I remember Hurricane Katrina, but in a way it was kind of like 9/11 where it didn't directly affect me. So I just didn't have this complete understanding of it. And okay, laugh at me if you will, but one of my guilty pleasures is watching the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders making the team. So sue me, you probably watch something I think is stupid, but in one of the very early seasons, one of the hopefuls had been displaced by Hurricane Katrina. And until I read this, I never really quite grasped why people were so widespread after Hurricane Katrina. You know, and it's really just this idea that, like, they had no home, obviously, like, particularly in New Orleans, like, things were underwater. And so it's like, not only did they not have a home, if they even had insurance, apparently they got the runaround. There was no support, no help left because there was so much need. Cities would double in size because of the refugees that were coming there. So people were just bussed to further areas. And so I just thought it was a really great look at the impact of Hurricane Katrina, or even Amanda's husband, Carl, who, oh my gosh, I just wish he had a little bit more comeuppance. That's just me, and I'm really vindictive. But he was like, oh, this is nothing. Like, oh, you know, it won't get past a category 2. Oh, you know, we don't need to get somewhere safe. We don't need to nail down our, like, put boards over our windows. We don't need to do this. We don't need to do that. So it's just really interesting how, yes, we have 20/20 vision on it, but they did not. Like, they thought that people being in the Superdome would be fine, yet the Superdome could not completely withstand the winds, and then knocked out power, knocked out water, knocked out everything. So people are stuck in places without air conditioning in 95-degree plus weather. Oh, it was just so great how she just snuck in all these other little things to just build the plot, build the suspense, but also connect and engage us in a way that is a little less obvious. So that is year 1, is Hurricane Katrina. Year 2, after Sarah's disappearance, is when Ellie kills herself. And it honestly comes out of nowhere. I felt particularly bad for Amanda because she really did try. She sent Ellie to therapy groups, she sent her to therapists, she put her on medicine, she gave her all the love and attention she could, but around this time, and this is one of my biggest issues with the novel, Carl just up and leaves her. So we had seeds planted, or not even seeds, we had like full force gales being like, look, Carl is not a good husband. You try so hard to be the perfect wife, but he is not a good husband. And he's just really selfish, he's abusive. Anyways, so she and Ellie come home one day, and he's packing up the car, and Amanda's like, where are you going? He's like, well, I fell in love with somebody else, and we're moving in together. I was like, okay, I get it. He's selfish. And yet he had been withdrawing because he did not like her involvement in the search for Sarah. And towards the end, we get some more, I guess, professional insight into their relationship and the abuse and how controlling he was. And so, you know, he wanted Amanda to be in her place. And then once Sarah went missing and she stopped being in her place and he could no longer control her the way he wanted to, that was sort of his breaking point. And so, but he just all of a sudden was like, I'm out of here. I think this dissolution of the nuclear household also did a little bit of number on Ellie's feeling of safety and protection. So yeah, like, there's really nothing going on. Amanda puts Ellie to bed. Ellie's like, Mom, I love you. Amanda goes to read the newspaper, and Ellie shoots herself. I knew it was coming because we know me. I spoil it for myself. I'd read the end. I knew she died. But I was a little disappointed with that, too, because she kills herself with a shotgun. And I'm assuming, I don't know if it's here, I don't know if it's here. Sorry if that's a little too graphic for you. But it's likened to the sound of her kicking over a cardboard box. I don't know how much research Cantrell put into that, how much experience she has with guns, but I found it very hard to believe it was so not obviously a gun. I know different guns sound differently, but if they're like, I don't even know where their bedrooms are situated, but I would just think it would be a lot louder than that and a lot more distinctive than the sound of someone kicking over a cardboard box. In any case, I thought this was particularly poignant for Amanda because a third of the book now, you just want to strangle Carl. And you just want to be like, and you kind of want to strangle Amanda too, because you're like, lady, this is your job, is to spot abuse and to be able to handle it. Yet, all of his abuse, because it wasn't physical, it was emotional, it was mental, it was verbal, she doesn't recognize any of it. And so, once Ellie dies, she's like, I don't have the will to live. And maybe Ellie's death is my fault. Maybe all the things Carl has said to me are true. And so it's really interesting to see how she sinks and then how she has to rise again. Granted, we don't see a ton of it because Ellie kills herself. We get maybe like 5 more chapters in the immediate aftermath, and then we fast forward a year, but still you see the severity of how Ellie's death affects Amanda, and then you see still how she's trying to pull herself out of it a year later, and it essentially happens because she is best friends with the police chief, Jay, who, spoiler alert, is in love with her. Anyways, he meets her at her new job because she has quit her therapy practice and she's doing something for a real estate company. And he's like, I need your help, because she used to go on calls with him all the time. And she's like, I don't do that anymore. And he said, well, I was already in the area and I just thought you might help because it's a suicide. And the wife found him, so it's just something that you are the best person for. It does help her. It helps her more than she realized, because at some point she had come to this conclusion or realization of, like, I was always able to tell people what they needed to hear. Like, I could sympathize with them, but I never really understood what it meant to empathize with them. And so now she can. Now she realizes, in the crowd of all these onlookers, like, nobody really knows what it's like. And so that sort of is that final push she needs to say, I can get through this. So year 3, not a whole lot is going on. And then year 4, Jay, one of his deputies, comes across Sarah at a routine traffic stop, and she finally admits who she is, and she comes home, and in the grand scheme of things, she's fine. Yes, she had been sold into prostitution. She had essentially been broken by her pimp, but she had been able to hold on to her faith, which had enabled her to basically hold on to her sanity. I like this, but at the same time, it's another thing that I question, that I wonder about. I'm sure she went through a lot of therapy, but she was so normal and so accepting of the situation and so able to handle it. Like when she's at the police station and Amanda comes in and she's with her parents, it's so normal. Like her behavior is so not ambivalent, but like, all right, I'm home. You know, there's no shoving away of the parents. There's no distrust. It's just like, all right, God finally brought me home. And maybe that was the whole thing, because that is what we saw through her journal entries. So she held on to her faith, and she knew that God loved her and he would get her through it. So I guess that's why we can accept the way she is reacting to her return home. We don't see a whole lot. Like, that's probably about here that she's found. So we see kind of things coming back to normal for her. For like the things that her parents had left behind after her abduction. We see how they're healing now that she's home. We see her healing, the way that she is helping to end prostitution and to find other abducted girls. And so that's kind of where it wraps up, and then Amanda and Jay get engaged. But that reminds me, there's this one moment towards the end where Amanda is at the supermarket with a friend of hers, and they run into somebody that they had gone to high school with, and this person was completely unaware of Amanda's situation. Obviously, this other woman is like, so, you're married, right? And you have a kid. And, you know, that's just a punch in the gut. And Amanda was like, how do you unload that on someone? You know, that's just something, I can't go there right now, so I'm just gonna say we're all right. And it's just one more way that this book digs into your soul, because it shows you how things never end. So yeah, like while Amanda had that happily ever after in the sense that she found a man who truly loved her, she was able to let go of Carl, she was able to forgive Carl. At the same time, she lost everything in the process. It makes me want to count my blessings, and I'm just really glad I'm not crying through this, because it really was so emotional, all the little moments. Alright, so there are plenty of good things that I will talk about if I have time, because I know I've gone on, but I gotta talk about Carl. Because Carl drove me crazy, and in that, Amanda drove me crazy. Because as I said, you know he's not a good guy, but Amanda, I guess, in her blindness, in her love for him, which please explain to me how she could love a man who is so cold towards her. But out of nowhere, like nowhere, he leaves her. And then he comes back, and then he leaves her, and then he comes back, and then he leaves her, and she's just like, I'm not going to sign the divorce papers. And all of this is sort of goes along with an abusive relationship where whoever the abused is just can't let go. This is what you know. And so while it's not that great, it's even scarier to not have it anymore. All of that aside, I just wish Carl had been developed a bit better. Cantrell tries to explain it away as he had a rough childhood himself, and so this is why he behaves the way he does, so we're just supposed to expect it. But I wished we'd gotten, just like with Ellie, I wish we'd gotten a little bit more lead up to what was going to happen, because honestly, we'd had maybe like 5 scenes with him, and then this big thing happens. There's a lot of mention of him, but we don't see a whole lot of him. And then he's gone. But then he keeps coming back, and he keeps causing drama in Amanda's life, and I was just like, I'm kind of over it. I get it. It's another way of adding tension to the book and causing problems in Amanda's life, but she's a smart girl. Can she, and everybody's pointing things out to her. She's agreeing with everybody, but at the same time, she's like, you know what? I see it. I agree with you, but I'm not going to do anything about it. Like, she literally will say that. I'm not going to do anything about it because I know it'll be okay in the end, or I know Carl will change, or blah, blah, blah. Like, I just, and I, So yes, all of that to say, I thought Carl was kind of weak. The Carl storyline was kind of weak. I liked the overall effect of it, but the actuality of it was not her strongest moment. I'm going to get off that rant train. I want to talk a little bit more about Sarah's journal entries, but before I do, let me kind of go to the beginning and tell you it took me, I think, 2 or 3 tries to get into this book. I think part of the problem is I did not have enough time to invest, to engage emotionally in the book. So I don't want to tell you it's a boring beginning, but it took me a couple of times to get into it. But the explanation of the feathered bone is when they were in New Orleans on that field trip. They go by this warehouse where people will put together Mardi Gras floats. And this woman, so I gotta say, when I first read this passage, I was like, soapbox anybody? But, so the woman working on one of the floats starts telling them about basically corseted women and how they were subjected to men and they were slaves and they needed to be free. And she was telling them, it starts out with whale bones, but eventually someone discovered, whale bones can break, but bird bones, they can bend a really long way without breaking. They're really strong. So that is essentially where the feathered bone comes in. And then it's emphasized when Amanda and the girls run across this fortune teller who has a sparrow, and she gives one of the sparrow's feathers to Sarah. And this is something that Sarah carries with her throughout her entire abduction. And it's kind of what starts off her ability to hope, because she has this feather, and then she's in a shed, so she can't see anything, but she can hear a bird, and she's like, Sparrow, is that you? Basically, are you the bird that was in the cage? She's talking about that little story with the fortune teller, and she's talking about the story with the whale bones and just how far a feather can go without breaking, and then she's given paper by her captors, and so she's just journaling. Me, being who I am, I read the end. So at the very end, we get some of these journal entries, basically because Amanda is parsing them for material that can be used against Sarah's captors. I didn't realize that these little journal entries were going to be sprinkled throughout the novel. And so at first I was like, man, like, I don't really know if I want these journal entries because it removes the mystique as to if Sarah is alive or not. So when I wrote down my list of pros and cons and things I wanted to talk about, this is something that I starred because initially and only, I don't know, I was going to say only because I'd seen it at the end and I already knew Sarah was alive, and I kind of liked the idea that that was a surprise. But, I mean, a lot of you may not like the idea of knowing that Sarah has survived, that you do want that surprise, but I think it's really important to have these, because even though at first I was like, meh, like, I don't like the journal entries, can we please leave them towards the end? They're important because they show Sarah's strength and determination. So I started, if I'm unclear, which I probably I started because at first it was a negative for me. But as the book went on and as you saw her development in the way that she was able to hold on to her faith, it was quite incredible. You know, and on some level, again, suspicious minds here, right? I did question how realistic that is, never having encountered somebody who has gone through prostitution, who's been sold into it, or human trafficking, or anything like that. I really don't know what kind of mental anguish they go through, what keeps them going, what kind of person they come out as. Because like I said, Sarah comes out pretty normal. And so I don't know if a lot more women come out hardened, whereas Sarah didn't. But I loved these little journal entries because it's kind of the faith of a child, the mustard seed, where, so as I said, she had been abducted by the boss of this prostitution ring, but he had sent one of his girls to get her. And this girl's name was Bridget. Throughout the course of the novel, we see how her faith has an effect on Bridget, because Bridget, who probably 10 years older than Sarah, had been sold into prostitution as a child herself, but she never had the love of a parent that Sarah had to hang on to. So now Sarah is showing her a love she's never experienced. She's telling her about a love of God that she cannot wrap her mind around. And it's so great because there are just moments where Bridget's like, why do you think God still cares about you? Why do you think this is a good thing for you? Or just all those kinds of questions that would break my spirit, because it's like, yeah, I've been here for 3 years. I've had to do all kinds of awful things. God must have forgotten about me. Or there's no God at all. Like with her parents, where they were basically broken of their spirit and their faith and their trust. It's just really cool to see how the little seed that was planted in Sarah before her abduction was able to grow and impact others. I loved it. I know if you're not a Christian, if you're not religious, you're like, this is really not the book for me. But guys, it's not preachy at all. It's just a way of showing how somebody can get through a tough time, and this is what they relied on. And yeah, there are some Bible verses sprinkled in, like there's the book is set into different parts, and you know, each part is headed by a Bible verse, but it's nothing, honestly, it's not preachy. It's nothing that should turn you off, okay? This book is fantastic. I will probably always find a problem with a book, although that's not really true because there are a couple books that I haven't. But this is one that trying to figure out how to get my mom to read it, because as I said, this thing's due tomorrow, so I can't give it to her now. But I'm like, I'm almost afraid to listen to the audiobook, because I loved it so much that I'm afraid that the narrator is going to ruin it for me. So I don't know if I want to buy the audiobook for my mom. I'll probably just go to Barnes & Noble. I would try to give it to her as an ebook, but she would never read it. 5 stars, 2 thumbs up. I will tell everybody and anybody to read it. And I encourage you to do it too. You know, there's a lot of tough stuff in there, but it is one of the best books I have read in a long time. I just couldn't put it down. So yeah, there you go. This one wasn't as structured as I try. I think I usually fail, but this wasn't as structured as I like to make them. I gave a spoiler super early on that I didn't mean to give, but it's probably that margarita back there. Anyways, check it out. Tell me if you know of anything similar that I can read. If you know of any more Hurricane Katrina books, I'm totally open to those now. Let me know what your favorite books are right now. See you later. Bye.